Mary Anne Petrillo is here from CEO of the West Business Development Center. I believe you're here to talk about MOVE2030 tonight, Mary Anne. I'm not even, didn't even get an official agenda. And also Una Workbow is back with us. Una was at our notorious August meeting and sat all the way through it. God bless her. And wrote a very nice letter to the editor after that as well. But Una has done a fantastic job with us on MOVE2030. I want to say that in front of Mary Anne because that's her boss. And we value her services very highly, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this later on tonight if you don't get to it first, Mary Anne. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Great.
Go for it.
Well, Una, do you want to kick it off, and then I'll start because you have been working so closely with folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've seen my face around. I have had the pleasure of learning so much about all of our different rural locations, Gualala being one of them. And you are also uniquely challenged with so many amazing opportunities. It's just been really quite wonderful learning about all of the intricacies of your communities. And it's coming to a head now. We've been gathering data for about a year, and it's about time to make a presentation to our Board of Supervisors about next steps. And so Mary Anne is going to kind of bring you up to speed with where we are, and hope that you are just as passionate about your communities as we move forward as you have been for the past year that I've been spending with you. So with that, Mary Anne has a screen to share, and I'll let her take it away.
So let me first of all say hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. It's, you know, I have very good memories of going down, you know, in person to Gualala. Of course, now we only see people two-dimensionally. So it's nice to see you, Mary and Robert and Don and Melissa and everybody who's on the call. So this is great. Unfortunately, we live in a two-dimensional space now. And so this is how we all kind of coordinate and collaborate these days. And I'm really thrilled, of course, that Una has been, you know, my right-hand person on all of this MOVE2030, and, you know, has not only been, you know, an excellent representative of the opportunities and potential, but really gathering the information and doing the analysis. So, you know, thank you, Una, for doing all that. It takes hours and hours of patience, of, you know, listening and understanding. And what we're looking for a lot is common threads, you know, common threads. It's things that are happening in every community in and around the county. So with that, let me go ahead and share these slides. And again, this is really, think about this kind of as an update. It's a very high level, but it's just to sort of give you a sense of where we're at right now and where we've come from, because I know not everybody has been intimately involved in this work. But the thing to always remember is that the work was begun and initiated through an EDA grant that was specifically designed to help the County of Mendocino develop an economic recovery and resiliency plan. It also included information about a broadband implementation plan, an economic coordinator, and digital learning hubs. What I'm going to talk to you today about is primarily the digital learning hub, primarily the MOVE2030 work, the recovery plan, but there are other aspects of the EDA grant. And ironically, you know, when this first was initiated, as I said, it was from the 2017 fires. And we thought that that was the economic disaster of our lifetime, right? And we set about thinking about resiliency in the context of climate change, technology innovations that are rapidly changing everything we do, and demographics in our county, which of course is stagnant and, you know, has very high senior citizen rate. And, you know, these will be significant impacts and probably will continue to be significant impacts over time. But then the pandemic came. And so, you know, the irony here is that you start out a resiliency plan with one thing in mind because you're trying to solve for one disaster, but what the pandemic has done to us is, of course, on a global scale, changed everything. It changed how we work. It changed this conversation that we're having here today. It changed everything that businesses are rethinking about themselves and what they do. It's changed governments, it's changed healthcare, and it's continuing to change it. And even when the day comes that we go back to a normal, as everybody has been saying, it is indeed going to be a new normal. And so with that, we really plowed ahead through 2020, even with all of the unknowns that the pandemic has brought upon us, to say we have to take this opportunity to really be thinking about what opportunities can there be to make Mendocino a more vibrant economy. And the work that the MACs do, you know, Una and I are both in agreement. We consider that really important because you are representing the remote regions of the county. We all know all too well that, you know, the cities have their government entities and they're working to, you know, they have funds and they have things that they're doing. But the remote areas of the county where a lot of commerce does happen is not getting as fully fleshed out. And so I encourage you after this presentation, if you haven't already looked at the new website, it has everything that I'm going to talk about here today and then some in much more detail. And it's an ever evolving website. So we want people to be assured to keep going back to it and looking, and it will keep everybody, of course, posted when new things do go up on the site. But the way to think about MOVE 2030 in terms of what we have done is the first phase was establishing the governance and how the project management was going to happen and the steering committee and getting coordination begun. The second phase of this is the data research. And, you know, it was in earnest, I would say, probably in the early spring months, just about when COVID hit. But it has gone on really through almost the entire year, because what we did was not just say, oh, well, let's get this economist to talk about this one aspect and, you know, multipliers or, you know, in specifics. We wanted to make sure that we were looking at data that is coming from the cities. We took into account all of the different MACs, and yourself included, who put together economic resiliency plans. We're looking at third-party economic reports from Beacon and other industry leaders, and then of course county forecasts. And so we really wanted, again, look for common themes, threads, problems, opportunities, etc. The third phase of this is one, and I know Tom and many of you others might have participated in this, which is really community engagement. This is where we really began in a very formal facilitation to gather groups of people across the county. And remember, with COVID, it actually, we thought at first it was going to be harder because it was all virtual, but in many ways, we got a much bigger representation across the county by doing these working groups. So a community economic action plan was put together, and think of it as the communities were telling us all what they saw would help as making the county more resilient. And they thought about it a lot in terms of projects. And I'm going to highlight a few of them in my next slide. But the complete outline of everything that was discussed and determined is in this document that you can download on the website. And then finally, you know, we're moving into now, what are the observations? What recommendations do we want to bring to the board? How do we want to continue this? What is this plan? Because a plan should never be, and we never went into this believing that this plan should be a book or a report on the shelf. There's lots of those already that exist in the county. Many of you may have it on your shelves. This we see as a living entity that will need nurturing and cultivation in order for us to reach new levels over the next 10 years. This slide just highlights a few of the sort of big picture items that came out of some of the community conversations. Obviously, our business network needs help. It needs help in all different areas, not just because of COVID, but we need help in things like ordinances and streamlining permits. We need more, you know, startup mentality and working groups. We need to understand the remote workers and pull together councils and marketplaces. So there's a whole host of things that developing a strong business community within the county is going to help. Apprenticeship programs and co-ops were big, not only for the agricultural community, but even for cannabis. And these are different kinds of business models and different ways of mentoring, which leads, of course, to developing talent in the county. This, of course, leads to trade schools, which a lot of community groups, residents, and people talked about. And there's challenges, no doubt, with all of these big ideas, but these are all big opportunities too, as you can see, that potentially could have a great outcome. And again, this is a synthesis of what is coming out of the economic action plan. Everyone knows that technology is not only not going away, but we are making it as part of our education, our healthcare, and our business and economy. If you don't have the access, if you don't have the understanding and the skills and the knowledge, you're going to be left farther and farther behind. Everybody across the board was aware of that. We chose, because we know that there are people working on broadband initiatives, and I can talk about this a little bit after this presentation. Our focus in this group was really about developing the skill sets that people needed and up-leveling that and doing more in the education arena, not so much on just solving the broadband problem or the lack of broadband, but that is in the works, and that is part of the overall EDA grant. And then sustainable infrastructure. So you were talking about charging stations, and that's just one example, but microgrids, the group that talked about microgrids and solar power storage and locations of where that is, and the realization that the PSPS could be here for a while, and what the grids look like, and how do we be energy independent over time, and what that does for public safety. So these are things that got many, many people very, very excited about doing. And what we want to do is, you know, synthesize this, get it into the understanding of community leaders, government leaders, private enterprises, and, you know, folks or organizations and nonprofit like myself, to look for funding for some of these, because we do believe truly that these initiatives could have a lasting effect. But overall, and this is really my last slide, overall, the observations that we found coming across all of the conversations, and remember there was many more conversations besides just the ones that were done in the working groups. Foundationally, as a county, we need to develop our local talent anywhere and everywhere. We need and must really reconsider how we have our permitting licensing processes. And also this goes to ordinances if we want any chance of really stimulating the economy. And this can't be done over time. We've already know that COVID has changed everything. So the streamlining and automating of permits and licensing is the only way that we are ultimately going to grow. Utilization of technology to not only improve service delivery, but also better customer service needs to be foundational, and common, consistent, and regular data collection. And I'm sure you've all experienced this, so I'm not saying anything new, but the reality is that without continually analyzing and getting data and then giving that data back to the community, better decisions are going to be made. And this goes for whether it's a broadband or whether it's a skills training and what skills are needed. We need to be collecting, whether it's on a county or city level, so that everybody can have the same data and be looking at it to make decisions for their community. And then we started to talk about things that are transformational. Oh, sorry. And these go right to the heart of towns like Gualala, right? Uncovering and developing assets with economic potential. So Tom, I know, like you talked about the hotel, and you talked about places where we know that there are assets in and around the county that have huge economic potential. We need to analyze that, we need to get a feasibility study, and we need to move on some of those things. over this 10-year period, we've got to start to realize that we do have assets that are worthy of growing in our communities. We also realize that revitalizing growing communities of commerce is really important. So think about the development of downtowns, the development of smaller areas, whether it's Anderson Valley, Gualala, Westport, Laytonville. You know, these are communities of commerce. They're not, I mean, Fort Bragg is doing things, Ukiah is doing things, we understand that, but there are small communities that are having more and more people come into them, and they see the potential, you know, of greater opportunities to have commerce and a thriving, you know, thriving downtowns. Establishing an economic development hub, so there needs to be something to carry these and to be accountable for carrying some of these projects forward in collaboration and communication with other public and private entities. And then finally, of course, this is true for all of us, providing timely, accurate, and coordinated communications. And we put that in there, and you know, you could probably see how even the communications around healthcare orders and vaccines and things like that sometimes is not always communicated or not always coordinated, and each of those become very, very important. So these are kind of big observations that we want to share with our Board of Supervisors, because we have heard these consistently, sometimes loud, sometimes soft, throughout the county in every place that we go. So again, this is an update, and also one of the reasons that we are coming to you, and you may want to share this with your community. I know there's only a few of you on the call here today, but I encourage you to share it, because we want feedback or thoughts, things that you like, things that you think might be missing, because we are preparing for a presentation right now. I believe it's going to be scheduled for March 22nd. And when that is scheduled, we are going to encourage everybody, of course, to come to that meeting, to the Board of Supervisors, and really have an honest and open conversation about economic development and economic strategies that need to be initiated in our county. So I'll stop there to answer questions and talk about any of the side things, but I'd like to know what you're interested in. Thank you. Tom?
Great presentation, Mary Ann. Thank you very much. And I know Una may have a couple of notes to add after this. I'm glad you mentioned the board presentation and writing to the board in support of this initiative. That actually is a separate agenda item on our tonight. I had it under my committee, but we can talk about it now. I put it in as asking board permission, the council's permission to write a letter in support of MOVE 2030 and your efforts to continue this effort. And I want to know from you, Mary Ann, what happens if the board, this was a one-year program as I understand it, and I'm wondering, has it been extended? Will it be extended? How can we make sure it's extended?
So we don't know. I mean, when the money runs out, you know, I mean, we're using up the grant funds, and you know, we have a few more months within this confine as it stands today. So we don't know if it's going to be extended, and there's many individuals and many associations right now who are asking for this kind of work to be continued and this kind of oversight to be continued. So you're not alone, and I would encourage you to do that. I would also encourage, I always believe too that when you write these letters, you should, you know, speak from the heart, speak from what is meaningful to your environment, your particular town and your work, and what you've seen that you like. MOVE 2030 is not going to do everything, but it certainly is a very collective process. And like I said, you know, what I hope they will focus on are some of the things, when I say they, I'm sorry, let me back up. When I say they, I'm talking specifically now, right or wrong, about the county itself, the Board of Supervisors. I want them to hear the continuing thread, because it's not just Gualala said this. It's like everybody said this. Everybody talked about these things in one form or another, you know, whether you're talking about improving your downtown or you're talking about, you know, needing connectivity so that you can do your business better. There are certain threads that continually happen over and over again. And we really would like to make sure that they make significant changes where the county is able to, and then they support the growth of MOVE 2030 so that it's a much more collaborative effort with all residents across Mendocino County.
Thank you. And you know, let me just add two things here. One, Robert and I have been working on the Streetscape Committee for a couple of years now. And one thing I've learned through this process is that we have a lovely town, we know that, but we don't always convey that well. Nothing we're talking about here tonight would threaten the charm of Gualala. We want to preserve what makes Gualala great. And we hear loud and clear from folks all the time, don't change it, leave it the way it is. No, what we're talking about here would help sustain it in the way it is by creating opportunities for our young people who now mostly move away for lack of opportunity. On the MAC level, we kind of keep our eye on housing. We have a water moratorium, and these are very complicated issues, but we know we need more worker housing down here. And that's a priority item if we're going to move our economy forward. The Streetscape project, we're bending over backwards to make sure that it amplifies the beauty of Gualala, not replaces it with some kind of monstrous freeway. We want to make sure that everything we do is for the benefit of Gualala and approved by the local community. But we do need help with the hospitality industry, which is a growing part and a very large part of our economy. It's a very low wage industry. But when people come to town, they also support our retail, our restaurants, our other businesses. Critical. You heard us talk about that in terms of the car chargers tonight. You know, our training for workers here. I know electricians who cannot find apprentices, even though they're offering $40, $45 an hour for entry-level workers. And I want to talk to our training people in the county and see if we can get a training program going specifically in that field. The whole construction industry is booming. Our contractors are busy, but the skill levels are lacking, and we can do better there. So these are some of the elements that I'd like to include in our letter to the board, and I will write one if the council gives me permission to do so. And the other thing, you mentioned it, Mary Ann, and thank you for that. But one of the things I've always thought from the start of this is that we have to have a local focus first, and it grows from the local community up to the county level and comes into a cohesive strategy, as you've explained. We always want to look at what's important to Gualala, and Westport will want to look at that. And, you know, any of the other MACs will be looking at what's important in their communities. Working with Una over the past year has been a real delight. She's really led personally a lot of these initiatives, brought a lot of us together. We have a meeting called Big Mac, which brings together the business people from the different MACs. And that's really on fire. That's really growing. We're all learning from one another and learning our differences as well as our commonalities. So heaps of praise on you both. You've both done a wonderful job this year. And I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, if I could, to give me the authority to write to the Board of Supervisors on behalf of the council to support MOVE 2030 and ask for them to keep it moving forward.
Yes, I'll second that motion if you made it yourself.
I just made it.
Yeah, I just want to say something that this was a overwhelming presentation. There's a lot in this presentation. I want to make sure we all know what website to go to so we can review this. And
Yes.
That's MOVE 2030, right?
Yes, it's MOVE2030.org.
Okay, good.
I think Una's going to put it in the chat. now, and you should spend some time on the website. There's a lot of information there, a lot of the plan, a lot of how we evolved, what we did, our intention and stuff. And Tom, like when we go into these things, we think that it's going to move in this like track, and it took turns sometimes, and we discovered things, and we went off, and when it was great about collecting this information, so we really knew what was happening in and around the county. I will say that the important things that's one of the reasons why I talked about foundational stuff versus transformational stuff is because I'll use this just as an example. I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen, but you have your hotel there, right? And let's say you have a brilliant idea for what that hotel should be. You could get stuck for years in the permitting process, right, and the ordinance process and the policy process for years. And I have examples of that all over the county. And I'm just feeling like we don't have time anymore. We have to make some decisions. The county has to really rethink their ordinances. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be environmentally sound and sustainable and stuff like that. But look at COVID. COVID forced the county to allow outdoor dining. And frankly, in many of the places now, outdoor dining is really nice. Like outdoor dining is really nice. You didn't have COVID, over your head. There are many, many things that have happened that, you're like, why did they not allow this? I mean, you're not blocking sidewalks. You're not so there's things that I think the counties really could be reviewing and looking at and changing sooner rather than later. We shouldn't be waiting 5 or 6 years to have a change of a policy or ordinance. We know the data. We know what's coming. We know electric cars are coming. We shouldn't be surprised about that. It's not like we have to wait until 90% of the county is riding electric cars to decide that you're going to do a certain kind of change. We know that these things are coming. So these are the things that I'm also very concerned about, is that they attend to some of the foundational things so that you can do the things in Gualala that you want to do that are transformational. That's important to note.
Yep. It all starts at the core of Gualala, and that's what we're trying to do with the streetscape, because it'll emanate from there. When you mentioned the Gualala Hotel, it went through a many year process already of getting it to the point where it's at. So what is going to be the future use of that hotel? We always talk about the yesterdays of Gualala. Well, you guys are all talking about what's tomorrow brings. So I think that's very refreshing to hear. I mean, Don's report on the electric charging stations. We've got to all start projecting into the future. And you guys, just wonderful presentation, I think. And Tom, thanks for arranging it. It gives us hope.
Marianne volunteered for this, and I gratefully accepted.
Okay. But we have a motion on the table, and we have a second. We can still discuss it some more, but then let's vote, okay? Don?
I think Mary had a question too.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, Don seconded? Thank you.
No.
I did.
I didn't have that. The motion was seconded. We just really haven't discussed it much.
We haven't. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I think it's a fine idea to write a letter to the Board of Supervisors regarding this. The only thing I would say is I think I'm hopeful that we keep in mind and really emphasize the importance of actions being compatible with the new world we are entering. And that world is a world of climate change. And so there are a lot of things that the county could do, obviously, to streamline the permitting process, as Marianne mentioned, I'm sure. I just do not want to see, as part of that streamlining, pushing aside very important environmental regulations that we really need. We are blessed to live in an extraordinary part of the state of California, and this area needs to be protected, not only protected, but restored. There are areas that need to be restored so that they can hopefully contribute to a carbon sink that we need to maintain and or expand going forward. The next 10 years are going to be critical as to whether we make the necessary changes to ultimately survive as a species. This is what the scientists are telling us. We have to take that to heart, I think, and sort of build this philosophy of making change within the context of a rapidly changing climate that are consistent with that situation that we're in, so that we're not going down paths that just produce more and more CO2 emissions, just because, well, that's how we've done it in the past to grow our economy, and that's what we know how to do now still, and that's what we're going to do. So, there's trade-offs that are going to have to be made, and I'm just hoping that any kind of economic development plan like this, and I do salute you, Marianne, because what you've done is very comprehensive, and you looked at a lot of different areas, and obviously this was a lot of work you put into this. And I certainly don't have a problem writing a letter, Tom, to the Board of Supervisors relating to this, but I also hope that within that letter, we emphasize that we think it's important that in totality, the steps that we take to move forward and build our economy better, it's all consistent with the need to adjust for climate change and make serious adjustments.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Don, I'd just like to comment on Don's for 1 second, because first of all, I absolutely agree. And I'm going to give you an example, right? And I'm going to give you an example about how you can improve. Okay, so right now, before COVID, right? If you were trying to do something in, I don't know, Westport, you would have to drive to the county to get a permit at the county. And you would have to sit with them many times, and I know because we serve 700 clients this year at West. So, and it wasn't just for grants and just for revenue, it was for many, many things. You would have to drive to the county, you would have to sit with your planning officer, only to tell them that you had to go actually to the Fort Bragg office. And so then they would drive back to the Fort Bragg office, right? But the Fort Bragg office was closed on the day that they had to do that, right? So then they're still going back to Ukiah because they couldn't get their paperwork. I mean, so, it's like I'm thinking about carbon emissions here, right?
Sure.
We need to, it's more than just, I'm not even talking about expanding and environmental changes. I'm talking about like utilize technology where you can so that people are not in their cars. I mean, we live in a community that's really hard to get to Ukiah and from the coast and back and forth. And all of that carbon emission, I mean, one of the things that COVID has done is lessen that because we're not in our cars driving, we're doing these things. They could automate processes, not everything, I realize that, but many things could be automated. And so it's utilizing technology also to improve the environment. I feel is an opportunity to be looked at and invested in. So sorry, I had to say that because I just, people forget how much we drive around this county to get things done.
Well, good. Mary, did you want to say something?
Yes, I was hoping the Hispanic and the Native American communities were involved in this because 30% of the coast around here is a Hispanic population. They live in fear, in isolation, in otherness. There are not many who are involved in owning businesses They're all in the service industry, and it's all low service industry. And I'm hoping that this population and these people have been included because they have been so segregated and live in so much fear. Just their last name puts them in the otherness department. And Action Network works with a lot of the Hispanic community, and only because of the anonymity and the privacy that Action Network supplies, that they do come. They come to Action Network for food bank rather than to the Baptist church, because they are seen at the Baptist church and they are not seen at Action Network. You know, people don't, the rest of the community does not see them getting food there. And so they're hiding out of fear, out of otherness, out of isolation. And I hope that 2030 will include more of these people to have this part of the country and this part of the county upward mobile.
Mary, I'm going to answer that for Mary.
That's all I had to say.
Oh no, it's great information and it's so on point, right? We have a very large population of disadvantaged individuals and families that are not heard regularly, and it's so important to get that voice. And that is one of the reasons why the MACs have been so important. And I'll give you an example, since Mary Ann's been doing such a great job. In Round Valley, they have a very large tribal presence. In fact, the second largest tribe in the state is the Round Valley tribe. But yet getting them to the table is virtually impossible. You have no idea how many emails and phone calls and sending physical people out to to drag folks to meetings. And I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very, very difficult. So attempting to overcome those specific challenges has been something that I've been keen on doing. And in Round Valley specifically, I was privy to information about a grant that would allow for free Chromebooks to be given to Native children as long as they were going to school. And because I have contacts now in that community, because I can't get an answer from tribal leaders, I physically had my contacts from MAC physically contact the tribal leaders and tell them how important it was to get a list of children and to ask them if they wanted free Chromebooks for all of them. And it took a coordinated effort. And I'm hoping that because those actions over the holidays, this all happened over Christmas and New Year's, but because we were so adamant about ensuring that they were at the table, I'm hoping that those stories will resound now to other members of the community to say, yes, we do want to help you. We're not just knocking on your door to ask you for something. We want to help you. We want your voice at the table. And if you just mentioned this Action Network, getting me access to entities like that will only help endeavor these challenges that we want to overcome to be more equitable across all access and everywhere throughout the county and the region. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. And by all means, anyone who has direct access to these communities, if there is any kind of leadership there that's willing to talk behind the scenes, to me, I'm happy to bring them up to speed with what's been happening and how we can hear them and make allocations for to make their world better.
I'm sure that the board of Action Network would be more than happy to work with you. I am on the board, and our executive director, Thais Mazur, would be more than happy to reach out and work with you. She works with the county all the time, the mental health and the food, and she lives up in Mendocino, so she has connected Action Network with Fort Bragg, Mendocino, and brought it together as a coastal community rather than just down here in the South Coast. And we really are trying to expand gardening throughout the community and open up our board to any and all who wish to join. We have had Native Americans and we have had Hispanics, but they don't last long on the board, and many times they're not present for board meetings. And it's very sad because we really, really want to reach out to all factions of the community. Seroptimists is the same way. I'm the president of the Seroptimist Club and have been a Seroptimist for over 40 years. So, you know, it's difficult. It's truly difficult to reach out. And I know exactly what you're talking about, Una. Exactly what you're talking about.
Well, we're
Been
open
there,
to
done that.
invitations to any organization, whether it's about West and what we're doing, or whether it's about Move 2030. I did present to the Seroptimists just recently in Ukiah. Which you may not know this, but West a year ago launched the Latinx program. So we have a whole parallel track to serve Spanish-speaking business owners. We've done it in webinars. We have advisors that are doing that. And as Una said, it's been very challenging. We have a position that's been open now for over a year for a Latinx coordinator position that we've been delighted to hire somebody who can work directly with the Latino community. And so I'm happy to pass that job description. Maybe you know some people, but it's there. And yes, we're really open to constantly sharing stuff. I know it takes time. It just takes time.
It does. It does.
Okay, may I say something? I feel pretty confident that, well, we're blessed with a council member who's a journalist, Tom, and I feel pretty confident that he can incorporate all these things that we've just talked about, including Mary Mobert's points, including Don's points. I'd like to hear still if Melissa has anything to say, and otherwise I think we should maybe take a vote on this motion we've had, or any last minute comments, okay?
No comment.
No comment from Melissa. Anybody else like to say something still? But I'm greatly in favor of Tom taking this bull by the horn and writing a nice letter. Go ahead, Tom, sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much time on this, but it's a natural follow-up to what Mary Ann and Una were saying. Mary Ann's got a great big picture vision of this, and so has Una. It was my pleasure this year as a volunteer, to work on one little small part of this, developing a plan for an incubator that became part of a much bigger plan. I think overall, I don't know how many people were involved in this massive effort. It seemed like 50 or 60. In my group, one fellow who really impressed me was Jesse Burnett, who at that time was with EDFC as their interim executive director and has now moved on. Jesse's a native, and his specialty is in enhancing communications with Native communities. And I reached out to Jesse just last week to talk to him about coming to Gualala and helping us reach out to Acacia population and get them more involved. He is keenly aware of the difficulties of communicating and the challenges in that. And I'd really like to tap his expertise and get him involved. The other person I wanted to cite on that group was Jesse Alvarado, who is a young 30-year-old young entrepreneur up in Covelo. And she really got me hooked into volunteering for this group because she told me about a Native woman there who came to her and said, you know, I want to start a food truck. And she didn't know how. She had no clue. She had no asset. And it wasn't a situation where she could go to some self-help group and get that kind of counseling. She could, but it's difficult for people in those kind of communities for all the reasons Una explained and Mary Ann explained about coming into town and meeting with people and being shy about that. But a big part of our group ended up being talking about outreach and particularly inclusiveness to make sure that we're reaching out to the Hispanic and Native populations, making special efforts in that regard. So those are just two tiny examples of how those those aspects are part of the fiber of everything that Marianne and Una have been working on for the last year. And I just wanted to share those from a personal example of what I saw on a minute level. As to Don's point about the environment, Gualala is about environment. We have to shape it for the future and protect it for the future and prepare for the future. Absolutely, or else we'll lose the paradise we have. I know the Coastal Commission is acutely aware of this as well. And part of the reason well, I won't go into too much on the Coastal Commission, but it has to do with, you know, they're putting new requirements on communities all the time. When they open up a local plan, suddenly that local community finds it has a lot more new requirements than it used to have. So that's something to think about as we talk about planning in this community. Anyway, I've taken up enough time. Again, my thanks to Una and Marianne, and I'm ready to hear the vote.
So Tom, this letter, you're going to draw a draft of it and send it to us fellow council members, or how are you going to do this?
We won't have a time to draft it. I think just ask you for permission to go ahead and write it and send it in. I'm pretty familiar with all these details. I'll certainly incorporate the points that have been raised tonight.
Great. And it's going to the Board of Supervisors, is that correct?
Correct. It'll be it'll be as short as I can write it, which is a short letter is more effective than a long one, but we'll make sure where we cover the points you're talking about.
And you'll copy us all with it, right?
Yes.
You will copy us all. Thank you.
Yes.
After he's completed it. Okay, let's call a vote here. Tom made the motion, I made the second. Let's take a voice vote here. Don?
Aye.
Melissa?
Aye.
Robert? I'm an aye. And Tom?
Aye.
Okay, Tom. Thank you very much for taking this on and for writing this letter. And thank you to our guests, Marianne and Una, for all the input you gave us tonight. That was very educational.
I will send the deck to Una, and then she'll forward it on to all of you so that you have copies of it and stuff. And don't hesitate. I mean, I'm here, Una's here. We're available for questions. And if you think anybody else needs to see this presentation or we need to share it with somebody else, please let us know and we'll be happy to.
If I get a chance, Marianne, I'll break this out as a separate video and put it up on the local Facebook pages so that people can see everything we talked about here tonight.
Okay, that sounds great. Great, well, happy to be here, and thank you again. Thanks for inviting me, and we'll continue to do this work. It's there's a lot ahead, a lot of good things, so thank you.
Godspeed to you.
Good night, everybody. Take care.
Good night.
Thank you, Marianne and Una.
Bye, Una.
Thank you.
Bye.